Hello, this is Tafara, and this is my part of the corporate law presentation with Harry and Taylor. These are some options I thought would be suitable business structures. I have a partnership, which is also known as unlimited partnership. There's a limited partnership, and I have limited liability partnership. These are fairly easy to set up. All you need to do is choose a name, choose a nominate partner. The nominate partner is responsible for managing the partnership's tax returns and keeping business records. Register with HMRC. Also, to set up a partnership, all you have to do is simply have a verbal agreement or even agreement in writing. These are the advantages of a partnership I thought were relatively important or major. The first one is a big advantage in business partnerships is that they aren't too formal and they have less legal obligations than limited companies. Having less legal obligations and formality means the partnership business does not need to complete a corporation tax return, but records of income and expenses must be kept. No confirmation statement is needed, as other types of companies' house forms that a limited company may need to submit will never be required for a partnership. The other advantages here are the partnership is relatively easy to dissolve at any time. What's meant by this is if any of the partners decide they want to quit the business or leave, they can, and there's not much hassle around it. The partnership is easy to start, as I've explained in the setup. In partnerships, you share the burden. By this, they mean all expenses and debts of the business is shared equally amongst other members, unless it's so stated in the partnership agreement. And another big advantage is greater access to knowledge and skills. What's meant by this is, for example, Annalisa and Sydney, they have had different experiences in life. For example, Sydney already has the knowledge and skills of running a sole trader, whereas Annalisa hasn't. But Annalisa, she's went to university to learn textology, and that means she's got the skills of communications and other language skills that may help her run this business and hire employees and new managers. The more major disadvantages of partnerships are unlimited liability. What's meant by this is there's no limit to how much expenses and debt they'll have to pay. It's all of it, including any of their personal assets until they've paid off everything they can of the debt and expenses. The business has no independent legal status. What's meant by this is Annalise and Sydney will not be seen separately from the business. There's no legal distinction between them. Another disadvantage is limited access to capital. What's meant by this is banks typically don't like to invest in partnerships as they're seen as high risk due to their unlimited liability. So they believe that they're likely to collapse. And secondly, because there's no legal distinction between them, if any court cases are to come up, then Annalise and Sydney will be held liable. Another disadvantage is the potential conflict. As we all know, not everyone in the world will have the same ideas and the same concepts. It's no different for partnerships. Annalisa and Sydney are very likely to have different ideas for different aspects of the business and how to run it. And the profits must be shared. This typically isn't a disadvantage in itself, but it depends how the business is run. As some people, for example Sydney, may decide to put more work into the business and decide to work more into the business and do more hours and do more for it, whereas Annalise might do less, and they'll still typically be earning the exact same amount, which is 50-50, unless it's stated in the partnership agreement. To set up a limited partnership, you need to choose a name, have a registered address, which is also known as the principal place of business, appoint a general at least one general partner and at least one limited partner. In this case, the limited partner is likely to be Annalisa, and the general partner is likely to be Sydney. And lastly, you have to register with the Companies House. The main advantages of this is there are limitations on liability. This is the complete opposite of the unlimited liability, which means that now Sydney and the limited partner will only be liable for however much capital they put into the business. It's easier to attract investors compared to basic partnerships. The investor is typically the limited partner, and it could be other people like banks, but it's typically the limited partner. Limited partners get a share in profits and losses without having to participate in the business itself. This means that Annalisa, as an example, would be able to earn just as much profit as Sydney would be with putting in less effort and less work. And there's no turnover issues due to the fact that if a limited partner chooses to dissolve or leave, they can easily be replaced with someone else. Any other investor can fill in the role of the limited partner. The main disadvantages are the general partners take charge. This means if Sydney was to be the general partner, he'd almost have full control of the business, and he wouldn't necessarily have to consult Annalisa for most of the decisions he makes. The other disadvantage is the general partner is per se fully liable for all debts of the business. For Annalisa and Sydney's case, this means that if they're to get into debt or a lot of expenses there, then Sydney pretty much has to pay for it, all with his own assets, all his money. Whereas Annalisa really just doesn't have to. And the last one is compliance challenges. What's meant by this is generally partnerships they require less paperwork than a corporation, but because you have investors, the limited partners, you still have to hold annual meetings and create a detailed partnership agreement. Limited liability partnerships, also known as LLPs, were created with the Partnerships Act in 2000. The main benefits of LLPs is that they are seen as a separate legal entity to its members. Despite this, I believe this is an suitable business structure for Sydney and Annalisa to adopt, as they will not be in an environment in which claims of negligence or lawsuits are high, so they don't require the protections of having their businesses as a separate legal entity like accountants and law firms do, because they typically have they're typically an environment in which so many lawsuits and so many claims and negligence are about. Furthermore, LLPs are complex to form. This in itself would pose a challenge for both Sydney and Annalisa, as they are both still relatively new to the business and lack a lot of experience. Based on this, I believe the negatives and nature of the structure of this type of business greatly outweigh the positives. How Annalisa, there's a way Annalisa can protect her investment. The best way for Annalisa to shield her investment is if anything goes wrong, is to have a partnership agreement with Sydney, as this will clearly lay out what both of them are individually responsible for in the business, and this can also determine the proportion of profit and expenses for both of them. I believe the limited partnership is the best structure that they should decide, as Sydney is a lot more invested into the business and he knows what he's doing, so it's probably more suitable and more reliable for him to control the business a bit more. And Annalisa has shown that she is more about the profits and investment, and she's willing to do whatever it takes to ensure that the business succeeds. As a result, this could mean her taking a backseat in the business and letting Sydney take control of it. Also, Annalisa is likely to dissolve if anything goes wrong, and if this is the case, we'd want the partnership to continue without her and just replace her with someone else.